the structural shaping of the tree, and this is where this comes into play a bit, it's very, very difficult to do when the tree's got leaves on. There's a lot more in this page that I really want to deal with, but actually not really today. I'll very quickly say, and I pretty much referred to this briefly in March as well. You see how I divided our beautifully coloured bonsai into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, 4 elements, if you like. What I would stress to you is that it is pretty damn difficult, if not impossible, to do all of these 4 stages of bonsai. 1, 2, 5. 5, sorry. All 5 stages of the bonsai equally well at the same time. It's not that you do the roots, but it's obvious place to start at the roots of. It's not as if you do the roots and do nothing else at all. I mean, clearly that's probably going to be impossible to do anyway. But when you're developing your tree, whatever it is to be a bonsai, whether you're developing it in the ground or you're developing it in a pot, the focus of the way you think about your tree should be, what am I concentrating on? What is the main focus of what I'm trying to achieve at this stage of the tree? And the initial stage is the roots. Now, if you already have good roots, and by that I mean, of course, the Nebari. Are you familiar with the word Nebari? Yeah. I was just thinking about people who are just joining us for the first time. Have you heard the word Nebari, Stan?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Nebari is important, but that's visual. That's purely visual. It's that part of the image looking absolutely good. But you know, the ramification of the root system, we dealt with that a bit in March, and certainly we'll actually come back to that in future repotting session. But the focus at that particular stage of the bonsai ought to be the roots. Clearly you can't do that without at the same time growing some sort of a trunk. You can't just grow the roots on their own. So having established that you've done the best you can at a particular stage, or you've done the most you can at this stage with your root system, and at the same time, of course, you've ended up with some kind of a trunk, then your focus needs to be on the trunk. And again, I definitely mentioned this in March, this is about taking decisions. This is about deciding at the right time how big you want your bonsai to be. You know, so, you know, if this bonsai, this maple, is to be a bonsai with a 3-inch diameter trunk, 20 inches high, which it isn't, but if it was, if that was if you owned this tree and your decision was for it to be a 3-inch diameter tree with 20 inches high, then you would need 5 lifetimes if you're going to do it in a pot. And in this pot, you'd need 25 lifetimes. If you do it in the ground, it's still going to take a long time, quite a few years, but it's feasible to do it within a reasonable period of time if this tree is growing in open ground. And you know, again, I talked about this last time, if you want advice from somebody who's made a fabulous job of developing bonsai in the ground, you have to look no further than your own club member, Josh. And, you know, it'd be great to get Josh to talk to people at some point, really, if you would. Because Josh learned very early on that actually to make good, and again particularly good deciduous bonsai, with good Nebari, big trunks. A lot of Joshua trees have big trunks on them, and the right balance of foliage that goes with that big trunk it's like going to happen in the ground within your own lifetime. In a pot, forget it. It's just, you know, if you want small bonsai, if your decision with this tree is perfectly happy with a trunk that's, you know, 1.25 inches across and 6 or 7 inches high, then by all means it can all be done in a pot. It's still quick to do the initial development in the ground. The growing of this inch trunk is still better done in the ground, or somebody else in the nursery having grown it for you. Then, but you can make a great little bonsai from this, spending its whole time in a pot this big. It might still do better with a slightly bigger pot, but it's feasible. So the development of the trunk is the next focus of all your attention, and the focus of your attention is based on having made a decision. Because if you haven't decided how big you want it to be, how can you possibly know what you're trying to do with it? What happens is you just let it grow, kind of willy-nilly, and it grows how it wants to be. Well, you know, maybe that suits the way you do bonsai, and fine if it does, but actually it doesn't suit the way we do bonsai. What we want is some clearly defined objective, and that makes you achieve results you wouldn't otherwise get. So now we've got the trunk, we've got the roots, we've got the trunk. So the next stage is to get your primary branches. So primary branches are here on this tree. Primary branches quite clearly on this tree. And yet again, you can't really only produce your primary branches without thinking about your secondary branches. So they have to be done at the same time, but at the same time you need to be focused on which is most important. And the reason I say that is because one of the greatest things that we need to understand about achieving girth on a primary branch, and by girth I mean the fatness of the branch where it emerges from the trunk, is that we need, if we're going to achieve that adequate, suitable girth, we need to virtually allow that branch to grow unchecked. And I remember talking about that in March. So the reason why that's pertinent to what I just said is because if you're doing that, if you're allowing this branch, for instance, to double in girth, but only for the first inch of its length, if you're allowing that to happen quickly, which you do by allowing it to grow out here, you can't worry about secondary branches. Because what you're going to do, having grown a bean pole out here, so as to get rapid girth down here, you're going to cut it right back to here. So you're going to cut off everything where your secondary branches would normally start. So in this particular instance, you can't do primary branches and secondary branches at the same time. Now, if you've already got adequate girth, like you have on that branch here, for where it is in the tree, and where it is on the tree, that's important, because the way I've drawn this tree, I've tried to make sure that the lower branches have all greater girth than the branch immediately above it, getting to the top of the tree where the branches have the least girth. We produce stylized tree images. We all know that you can find a tree in the landscape where there's some little branches way down below the biggest branches. But they look, in a bonsai, they look odd. In our bonsai, in an ideal world, we want the biggest branch at the lowest part of the tree and the thinnest branch at the apex of the tree, and we want a nice even graduation between those two extremes as best we can. And if you doubt what I say as being true, then try to look at pictures of good Japanese deciduous bonsai. Not difficult to do, because all the Japanese shows are staged in the winter when the deciduous bonsai have no leaves on them, so you can actually see beautifully the structure. You're also going to be looking at pictures of arguably the best bonsai of that kind in the world. And I guarantee if you look, I'm not saying you won't find the odd case where this is not true, but in the vast majority of cases you're going to find that the branches at the bottom of the tree are fat, and they get thinner and a little bit thinner, a little bit thinner, and thinner and thinner. The other thing is they get thinner from here out to the outside of the branch. So this is where primary branch, secondary branch ramification comes in. Now, we've dealt briefly with the fattening of the girth of the base of our primary branches, and believe you me, that's something we will come back to time and time again, particularly when we have a session which is dealing, focusing more exclusively on actually shaping our trees, how we decide the shape of the tree and the way that we go about doing that. Having established that, so having got all our primary branches more or less where we want them to be and the girth that we want them to be, then we can focus much more readily on our secondary branches, which need to be not quite as fat as our primary branches, and they need to be better ramified. They need to divide and spread more. So all the time we're growing our tree, that then becomes the main focus of what we're doing. And the focus of what we're doing is achieved mainly by pruning. Growing it, so healthy trees. Going back to an hour or so ago, what did I say? We want our trees to be growing like mad. We want them to grow because then we prune them. Because then we grow them some more, we prune them. Now we might be growing to get fat branches. We might be growing to get good fats, not as fat, but good fat secondary branches, or we might be growing to get ramification. But all of it involves growing and then cutting bits off, growing and then cutting bits off. Now, for the whole life of your bonsai, clearly the Nebari pretty much doesn't change much. Now, that's not really true, because we may always be looking to modify and improve our Nebari. We can only do that at repotting time, and we might need to do that because the roots get fatter, of course, and much more slowly than anything else at this stage, but certainly there may be times when we need to prune roots away and allow the development of other roots within the Nebari. So although we can think of the Nebari as pretty much being as it is forever, there are some instances where we'll be looking to make some improvements, some changes, but maybe not until some significant period down in the future. Certainly our trunk doesn't change very much once we've established the trunk. We've set, because we've decided ourselves at the beginning, we've decided our bonsai is this fat at the base and it's this high from the roots to the top of the tree. That will never change. You know, as long as you keep your tree, it's not going to need to get any higher, not going to need to get any taller. So, you know, fair enough, the girth very slowly gets fatter, but we tend not to really be able to notice that. You know, we don't live long enough to be able to see any great significance. You know, I'm talking about once our tree is in a pot and we're beginning to control the growth by growing it in a pot. So the Nebari and the trunk stays the same. The primary branches stay the same. You're going to almost never cut off a primary branch unless it dies, unless the image of the tree changes so much that a primary branch is no longer a good branch to have wherever it happens to be in the tree. And I suppose the nearest, the most likely case for you having to cut primary branches away is going to be in the apex of the tree. Now, I've got a really good Japanese white beech at home, very mature Japanese tree. It's like this, you know, good graduation, all these things I've just been saying. But the apex is quite dense. The apex has got a lot of heavy branches in it. And that's the one area of the tree where I may well have to selectively remove one or two of what would now be considered the primary branch structure of the tree. Because in the vast majority of our trees, and certainly some of us in the room know that there are exceptions to this, but in the vast majority of our trees, the apex is always the most dominant part of the tree. It is where all the growth of the tree goes to if you give it the opportunity to do that. And why is that? Well, because a familiar phrase of my bonsai teacher was that these trees do not want to be bonsai. We want them to be bonsai. They want to be great big trees in the woods. So great big trees in the woods are fighting to get up to the light, because if they don't fight to get up to the light, the other trees shade them out and they may eventually die and wither away. Now, you know, we're working to a miniature tree scale, whether this miniature or 4 foot high miniature, we're still working to miniature scale. So we need to control that desire of the tree to become a big tree in the woodland. We want it to look like a big tree in the woodland, but we want it not to actually be a big tree in the woodland. So we need to control that desire, if you like, of the tree to be forever growing up through the apex. And so, generally speaking, through towards the end of our development stage of the bonsai, a lot of the focus of our pruning will fall on the apex of the tree. And as I say, this is the one area where, from time to time, not regularly, you know, maybe only once every 5 to 10 years, you know, we're sometimes talking in quite long time spans. Well, that's the nature of bonsai, really. We may actually have to remove primary branches from the apex of the tree. So then,